Yeah.
You owe you time.
That's how I got through life.
I felt like I wasn't like, you can't always be but she just.
Yeah, it took me the whole separation.
Yeah, there's no motions.
Yeah.
That's probably what I was reading.
Yeah, they kind of got spanked.
Right, as much as
We have had the pledge in our moment of silence, and we'll have a roll call. Melinda will be late with prior notice.
Commissioner Kramer,
Yeah.
Commissioner O'Rourke,
Here.
Commissioner Rexroth,
Present.
Chairman Wessel,
Here.
Commissioner Ross,
Present.
Commissioner Elguy,
Yes.
Commissioner Lautner is absent with prior notice.
And we have an agenda here, approval of the agenda. Could I have a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
All those in support of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same. Motion approved. We have an agenda. The purpose of our meeting is to give some direction and hear from John and Trudy, and we're not going to make any decisions today. We're going to try to begin to sort out the direction we're going. And I see this really as your meeting to talk to us about your recommendations and Trudy's recommendation and John's funding ideas. So before we do that, any public comment? Want to do it again, Zach?
I think the first time wasn't on.
So the meeting's yours, Deb.
All right, great. Well, I did send out a memo to everyone in terms of the committee of the whole, and the purpose of the meeting is, as I saw it, and in terms of being able to talk about all these initiatives and kind of where we are, and also help to give some comfort to the Board of Commissioners from the standpoint that there is a process that we typically should be following in terms of when we have items or projects that come to the board. They should be vetted through the Planning Commission as part of the CIP. And so I think that's one of the key things as a takeaway that I'd like the commissioners to understand, that there truly is a process that's in place. And sometimes we find ourselves in situations where we're dealing with projects, even like the project that we just discussed with the health department, that's not part of the CIP plan. And if it had been, then there's a process for us to be able to address this and look at where it falls in the priorities. And same thing with, even though the juvenile detention is a little bit different because it's not actually a capital improvement at this point, but there could be some staffing commitments with that. But those types of projects, that is truly the intent of the CIP, is to provide the board with a vetting process. And so I'd really like to kind of get back to that process and kind of make that the standard, understanding that this would be how we'll vet things going forward. And so with that said, a couple of the documents that you have in your packet, the MLI agreement, I put that in there because I wanted to emphasize to the board that when I first started, there was discussions about several initiatives that were already in process that, because of my newness, it made sense to, and that's on page 2 of the MLI agreement. I believe that everyone should have, I think it's the executive proposal. And if you don't have it, I'll just again reiterate what those 5 items were that we contracted with the MLI to provide for us. And that was to support the effective transition of responsibilities necessary to coordinate the engineering firm to develop the design of phase 2 and phase 3 for the HVAC system. So you'll be seeing those bids coming to the board. The same group that it was working on the project in terms of the build out downstairs is also the same group that is doing the design work. And then we'll be submitting bids for review. Again, it's a bid out process, and then those bids come back to the Board of Commissioners for either approval or disapproval, in terms of moving that project forward. So that will be coming in the next month or two. Support for the effective transition of responsibilities necessary to manage the health department's environmental health division renovation project. So that's what you just, where we were with the most recent discussion. To finalize efforts with the 6-county community mental health restructuring task force. So that is what the board voted on at the last meeting in terms of approving that multi-county agreement, operating agreement. And then the support for the effective transition of responsibilities necessary to coordinate efforts with local government officials and the CEC, which is Cherry Land Electric. And that's regarding the tower in Leland. So you'll be seeing several agreements, draft agreements at the next board meeting that addresses the status of that project and what would be required to move that forward as well. So that'll be in your board packet for next Tuesday. And then support of the transition of responsibilities regarding to the ARPA funds. So where we are with that, we'll be discussing that a little bit today. You were given a sheet of paper that was at your desk that talks about the Leelanau County American Rescue Plan funds. So these are the allocations that have been approved by the board based on what our county received.
Diana, does everybody have the packet that she's referring to?
I'm not sure which, it should have been, I know that you already have received the capital improvement plan as part of my summary. So I just was going through the MLI that had been received
MLI?
before by the Michigan Leadership Institute. So that was the information that we had done the agreement with, the
So
check
it's
with the
not in this
consultant.
book.
I don't know that that is actually in there. This was just a reminder. You've seen it before, but this was just kind of an update on those 5 projects, like where we are with those 5 things. The agreement ended the end of March. And so just kind of saying that we are within, I'd say 30 to 60 days to finalizing all of those different projects that were in play. That transition is now happening where I'm managing those elements going forward. So trying to bring them to fruition. So then the next thing that we have on the agenda as a review item is the 2023 capital improvement plan. And I've asked Trudy to give us an overview. She has a couple slides that she wants to share. And then kind of a deeper dive on the purpose and functionality of the capital improvement plan and the process of how that all comes together. So Trudy, if you would mind. Sure.
So you have this handout, I gave it to you just a little while ago. I'll put this up on the screen as well. So I prepared for you some slides. Let's see. This here first. I don't think I'm on the top page. There we go. Okay, so I'm not going to read everything on every one of these pages for you, but I want to make sure that you have an understanding of the capital improvements program and how that relates to the budget and how we should be using it. Over the years, I think the county board has done a really good job of getting the CIP more in place, but still I think we have gaps where we're not fully using that document to do what we should for projects that are presented for the county. So the first thing to just let you know is under the Michigan Planning Enabling Act, it states that if you have a master plan in place, then your planning commission every year shall adopt or shall prepare for you the capital improvement program of all the public structures and improvements. And the first CIP that was completed for Leelanau County was done in 2006. One of the other things I wanted to point out for you is that the Michigan Planning Enabling Act also requires that if you have a capital improvement program in place and any plans in place, then prior to spending any money on any projects for such things as physical location of buildings, purchase of property, leases, and so forth, you have to run that project through the County Planning Commission for their review. And Leelanau County has been very good about doing this in the past. We reviewed this site for development for the law enforcement center, for the government center. We reviewed the purchase of Veronica Valley when they were going for Michigan Natural Resources Trust Fund money to purchase that property. We've reviewed tower sites and so forth. So I want to just make sure that you're aware of that is a process that has to be followed under the Michigan Planning Enabling Act. And yes.
Question, is the current tower that's proposed for Leland, is that on the plan?
No. I don't believe so. I'll double check that. Okay, so let me go on to the next slide here. So there's four sections in the CIP. Part one is the overview. It just explains what is the CIP, what are the benefits of having the CIP in place and the implementation and so forth. Part two is your existing inventory. So what we do is every year we double check with Laurel and she checks with your insurer, Michigan Municipal Risk Management Authority, and we make sure that we've got a list of all the things that are on that inventory, and we include that in this document. And then part three is the recommended capital improvement projects. And there's two different charts for that. One of those is a chart that kind of gives you a little summary of what the project is, the priority, when it will start, when it will be completed. And then the second chart kind of explains over the 6-year time period of the CIP, when that project would start and when it would end and where the funding would fall. That chart is really developed mainly by my office because when people give us a project, they don't really know when it's going to start or end. They may have an idea that we're going to start this in 2024 and it's a 2-year project. So we might take that total amount and just split it in half, saying we're going to pay half of it the first year and half of it the second year. But we really don't know how that funding will occur until the project would actually be approved. So the goal of the plan is to use this use the CIP as a short-term and long-term planning and management tool. And part four includes recommendations. So the recommendations in there is to adopt the CIP every year, maintain planning and funding for your projects. And then there's also a submittal form for the departments to use. And that is a form that the county board reviewed several years ago and approved. So that is the form that's always used by the departments to submit their projects.
That is the form that you all received, I believe last month we forwarded that out, so you can see what the process was, what evaluation process is used by the planning commission to be able to make their determination, and they're evaluating what priority those items are.
So when we look at a CIP and we say, well, what is a CIP? What does it do? Essentially, it's a plan. It provides a link between these departments or these agencies and what they're proposing for you to consider. And then also link to those plans, such as a general plan or a Parks and Recreation plan. And then finally, the link to the budget. And when it's working well, you have all of that linkage, pulled together nice and tight. And you have the proposals. It shows the plans and where these projects came from, and it's included in your budget. It's a 6-year plan. And again, we revise it every year through our department and the County Planning Commission. This slide just shows you some of the reasons why the CIP is important. It focuses the attention of the community goals and needs and allows the public to be informed about what you're doing and what you plan to spend money on. It encourages more efficient program administration. It identifies sound methods for funding these projects so that you know ahead of time, where the money is coming from. It can also enhance the county's credit rating if you have a CIP in place and you are watching the funds and how they're being spent, and you're not, overstretching yourself in projects. It helps plan for the future debt, and then of course, I think one of the biggest things is it helps the leaders make good decisions based on all the information they have looking towards the future. So these are the steps for the CIP. The beginning part of the year, we always give the application form out to the department heads, and we tell them, here's the deadline when you need to submit projects. They complete that form as well as they can. It's about 5 pages. And then the projects are reviewed by our staff in our office, and we score those, and then we update that document. From there, it goes to the County Planning Commission. They review it and modify it, and they look at the priorities. The prioritization of each project, and then they approve that document. Once they're done with that work, it then comes to the county board. You have the ability to make any changes that you want in that document. So for instance, you may not agree with how something has been prioritized and you think it needs to be higher on the list or lower on the list. You can make those changes before you actually adopt the CIP. And then once it's, yes.
Have there been some years where instead of adopting it, we've just received it,
You've accepted it.
accepted it?
Yeah, there's been different
Is that the
language that's
same
been
thing?
used. No. I think the concern in the past was if we adopt it, we have to do everything that's in the plan, and that's not true. That's, every project still has to come to you. That's actually later in a slide, but I'll say that now. Every project that a department or an agency proposes, even if it's in the CIP that's adopted, They don't get to just go do it. They still have to follow the budgetary rules. They have to bid out projects or get estimates, identify the funding and bring it back to you for approval, and then you still have the final say on it. So things might change from the time you adopt the CIP until the time somebody comes to you with their project and you decide, well, you said this was gonna be $150,000 and it's twice that much money. We're not gonna do this project.
So along those same lines then, Trudy, so for example, the project downstairs, that should be submitted to the planning commission as
Right.
as a project, and it should be put on the 2023, 24.
24
actually,
CIP.
CIP, so that then we're looking at that as part of the 2024 budget.
Right. It's not in the CIP at this
But
time.
it's not in the CIP. Has it been nominated or has it been?
No. And I think Doug had a question. So,
So I guess just characterize, back to our chairman's question of characterizing this, it's kind of like a plan to have a plan, rather than, we don't act on these things. If we do accept it as Chairman Westlaw asked, we're not committing to these projects. We're saying this looks like the outline of a plan, but of course, costs come in different, revenues come in different. We're not saying we're actually doing all this stuff. This is just an outline of what we see as important to us or prioritize things.
Right.
So trying to understand exactly what is that.
right. It's your planning tool. It is not the authority to go ahead and do those projects.
That answers the question. Thank you.
So we kind of double check ourselves with, just send it to the planning commission. I like the project downstairs.
Yes, that we have no submittal from that.
But we
Those-
don't have any department heads and step one is department heads. We don't. Would Deb submit that then, or who?
We could have it submitted through the health department or through the administrator's office. That one was kind of unique, it wasn't on the radar. We didn't see it, and the applications went out back early part of the year. We didn't see it last year either.
So because, we did have an administrator last year too. So I just want to pause before saying it'll be 2024, that just because we didn't, no one said last year, oh, we have to do this. I don't see that as a break. I see that as let's be sure to do that next time.
And I think we can either put it on there and just say 2023 through whatever, because in light of the delay, we probably aren't going to be starting the project until probably end of 2020, essentially. Depending on the bids and everything else and the timeline for construction. So
I just don't like hearing saying, oh, we can't do this unless
no, I'm
there
just
was a
saying.
hoop we were supposed to jump through and we did.
Yeah, and you have had projects in the past that have come up after the CIP has been adopted that ended up being something that had to be taken care of quickly. It wasn't in the CIP, but the county board went ahead and took care of the project anyway.
Do you know an example of that?
I knew you were gonna say that. I think maybe the dam situation was one that was not on the CIP. But there were issues there that had to be handled quickly. But since that time, we do have some issues on the CIP related to the dam.
I just don't want to all of a sudden say, oh, we didn't take this step, so we can't do it.
Go ahead, Judy.
Okay. So your CIP, this is just some of the information that it includes. It's lists the capital projects or the equipment, the projects that are ranked, the financing options. Then you have a timetable and justification for the project, as well as explanation of the expenses. Real quickly on a capital improvement, in your CIP, we have identified that it's anything that's over $5,000. So if it's below that amount, we don't consider it in the CIP. There's even been some cases where something was a little over 5,000. We didn't put it in there because we figured those bids are coming in, they'll be under that. There's no need to put it in the CIP. So it's a major expense. It usually has long-term costs, such as a building, and it's an asset. So you want to look at it that way. There are other things that can go on the CIP though, such as the purchase of cars every year. So that is an annual expense, you know it's coming up, but we do include that in the CIP so that you know what those costs are and it's on your radar every year. So there's some examples here: bikeways, libraries, towers, street improvements, and so forth. And the next slides ask, is every project a CIP? No, it's not. It involves major renovation or purchase, land acquisition, and so forth. And then, as I had mentioned, some items are maintenance costs or replacement costs, such as the vehicles, but you can put those in there if you want. I've seen some CIP documents that drill right down to each department's budget as far as what they're buying for supplies every year. I think that's overkill. That's already in their budget. But again, it's your CIP. It's how detailed you want it for county expenditures. So then we get into the next step of the CIP, which is the criteria, the ranking, and the prioritization. So the criteria is there's a set of planning criteria, and I believe in the CIP, it's on pages 6 and 7. And it explains, in order to be considered as a CIP, it's got to meet this criteria. For instance, there's a risk to public health or safety. It's a deteriorated facility that needs work. It's something that needs to be replaced. You're protecting or conserving resources, or a new or expanded facility. So we have this criteria when people submit a project to us. We have one right now that I don't think will fit that criteria because it doesn't fall in line with any of that. It's more of a planning type situation that would go on for several years, but it doesn't fall into any of these situations. So we'll take a look at that one for 2024. After that, we do the ranking. So if it passes that criteria, we look at it on 4 categories: the public health and safety, the consistency and coordination with other agencies or departments, the efficiency and the level of service for the project, and then the funding. And then finally, well, let me show you this one. This is the ranking. So based on those 4 categories, I'm going to show you just one. So this is public health and safety. And we ask these questions here, and I gave you the examples that we use from 2023. So under project health and safety, we ask, does the project completely eliminate or prevent an existing health, environment, or safety hazard? And then there's points that are given. 2 is that it completely eliminates any health or safety issues. 1 means it partially eliminates that, and 0 means that it has nothing to do with public health or safety. And then we have that the Planning Commission can enter NI, which means there's not enough information for them to make any determination on that. And that goes back to the application. And then the next question is, does it alleviate an emergency service deficiency or disruption? Same thing with points. And then the final question is, does it satisfy a legal obligation, meaning that the county is required to do this? And then there's 4 categories. There are similar type questions in each one. Planning Commission and our staff go through these and answer these questions, and it's usually pretty simple. You can't really deviate too much from a 0 to a 2. Either it's handling the issue or partially handling it or not at all. So it's pretty clear. And then what we have is a weighted score. This is where it can get a little difficult. Staff always does this for the Planning Commission. We tell them, put your scores in, we'll take care of this part. So there's the things that are a higher weight is public health and safety and funding. That weighs higher than whether or not an agency is, coordinating with another agency on a project or the level of service. And the reason we do that is you could have a project come in and score really high in those other areas and outscore a project that is dealing with health and safety. So instead, we give it a percentage and we weigh that, and then we, put it through the math and then come up with the final scoring. This is the part that the Planning Commission, they kind of struggle with that. It's tough. It's tough to go through this and rank these, and it's everyone's determination on some of these as to where they think it should fall. And then finally, once we get the numbers, we look at the prioritization, because we're still not done. Something may score high, but the Planning Commission talks about it and says, wait a minute, this cannot be a higher priority than this project over here, even though it's scored higher. So they'll go through those numbers and look at that. So your highest priority is number 1, it's urgent. This is something that is handles a situation where you have issues dealing with public health, safety, or welfare. That's a high priority. It complies with a federal or state requirement. That means that you are going to take care of it. You need to take care of it quickly. It satisfies a legal obligation, or there's a short time frame to complete it, so you need to act on it quickly. And then your next level is priority 2. So these are important. They don't rank as high as the first one, but they're still important. And they might be consistent with plans. It might be a major public improvement or some critical program that you feel needs to be put into place. Most of the projects that we get fall into 2s. And the third one is desirable. These are projects that they're beneficial. We would like to do them, but there's no harm if we don't do them or if we put them off for a while. And it's more of a, be nice to do them, but we don't have to. So I'll get down to my last slide. So where are we with the current CIP? We've taken in all the applications from the departments. We are working on prioritizing those projects. And from there, we will update this whole document and get it sent back out to the County Planning Commission. And then once they are done with it, we will bring it forward to you. And we want to always bring it forward to you before you're done with your budget so that you can see what we have on the list. And then here's my final note there. I mentioned that earlier. Inclusion of your project in the CIP document does not mean that it's automatically funded and you can go forward with it. And that's something we always remind all the departments. They still have to follow all the board rules and board policies. And I wanted to point out for you on the current CIP, you have 6 projects that are from 2016 that have not been done. And I pointed this out last year to the county board. They didn't make any decision on it. You can choose to just drop those off because we are past the 6 years. So you've gone through a whole 6-year cycle and have not decided to fund those projects. So you could make a determination on that and take them off, take some of them off, or we could leave them on. And then you have 7 projects, just my rough glance of this day, 7 projects that are either done or they're in the process. So for instance, the website, we're in the process of doing that one right now. And then you have a question?
Yeah, the criteria and that process of 6 years and it's all,
Mhm.
that's all set by the Michigan Enabling Act?
Yes,
We didn't change it.
no, the CIP is a 6-year process.
But I mean, that's state dictated.
Yes.
And all the criteria that we use to prioritize.
No, now we can change the criteria on that because we developed this process years ago and ran it through the planning commission and then through the county board. So that can change. And the numbering can change if you decide we don't like just 3 options. We want to have it spread out more from 1 through 5 or 1 through 6 on projects so we can kind of
So we
layer
started in
more.
2006, you said, and have we looked
Yes.
at the priorities criteria since then? Or is it
no.
no plans to do that? Or?
It's never been brought up before. It's been working fairly well, but we're open to suggestions on that, yeah. One final thing for you, this larger sheet that I printed out, these are just the priority ones in the current CIP. So I filtered that to take out everything else, just to show you is that you have 6 projects that are listed as priority ones. The patrol vehicles are one, but that is an annual thing. So that's just going to repeat every year as the patrol vehicles get purchased and the old ones get sold off.
Lynn had a question and Doug had a comment.
So you partially just answered it because you mentioned 6 and said something about we could just take those off. And I thought you meant this 6. And I was gonna
Oh,
say,
no.
and I was gonna say, we're doing patrol vehicles and haven't we been buying body camera? We've been approving things like that as well. And just so everybody knows, the sheriff's patrol boat has been on the list for years. And we always say, we'll commit to a certain amount of it and go for it, raise the rest. And he keeps trying every year. So that one kind of stays just for history.
Right, so to go back to the
What are the 6?
body cameras, the car and body cameras, I would have to go back to the actual application like this that comes from the sheriff's office and look at more detailed information on why they want them. In talking with him, it was an upgraded type system that he wanted to put in place for the vehicles and the body
Seems
cameras.
like we okay things.
I believe he's still got that on the list for 2024, but I will check on that. The six projects from 2016 that are still in there are the patrol boat, a new pole barn for storage and security at law enforcement, security fencing and electric gate for law enforcement, improvements at Miles Kimberly Park, which there's a variety of them, improvements of Veronica Valley, same thing, and equipment for maintenance of the parks. I believe a few of the things from Miles Kimberly and Old Settlers have been done, so we can modify that a little bit. But we leave those numbers in there so that you can see what year they first appeared on the CIP. We don't change those numbers every year.
I was gonna say, we've been chunking some of those.
Mhm.
As still a question to Commissioner Ross, the ranking percentages that you use for weighting, those are determined by the planning commission or are they set statutorily?
No, those were set by the planning commission, and then we ran it by the county board years ago to say, this is the process that we want to follow. And everybody gave the okay. But again, it can be changed at any time.
Okay, thank you.
The ones in the green here are
Oh, that's just to separate the
the
rows for you. You have to make them pop out a little bit. There's no significance to the
Okay,
color.
just checking. Thank you.
Judy, I had a question about the priority group, because this board and last year's board, and for 3 years, we've been talking about a Leelanau. And it's on the capital improvement plan, but it's listed as a priority 2. Now, if you live anywhere north of Northport, you don't have even landline service in some places. I don't know how you determine whether it's a priority 2 or a priority 1, but it is a priority 1 to me if you cannot contact emergency services or dial 911. And I think that, the tower people talk about it every month at their meeting, but how does the planning commission come up with a priority 2 on that and not a priority 1?
So that goes back to the questions and how those questions are answered. And then the weighted score, we'd have to go back and look at all those. But again, even though the planning commission will bring you a document before you approve your budget that says, here's the CIP, here's how we ranked everything, you have the ability to change that.
Right.
In the past, you haven't. The board has not made changes to it, but you can say, we don't agree with that being a priority 2. It's got to be a priority 1 and rise up higher on the list. And the priorities, that's what you really want to look at when you're down to, okay, we have $5 million that we're going to use on projects and we have $10 million of projects. What are we going to use them on? Then you start narrowing down saying, all the 2s and 3s are definitely out. And we got to look at the priority 1s as to what we're going to fund or not fund.
So we're not bound by the priorities planning commission.
No, you're not. And again, it's a planning tool. It's changing all the time.
And the board has the ultimate decision on approving that document. So you have the ability, and I would say you have not only the ability, but I would encourage you and say you have the responsibility or the obligation to look at these and say, based on public health and safety, based on some of these other issues, based on, community needs or current emergency issues, urgent issues perhaps, to look at this document. This is why we're spending this time on this, because I think this will really help the board to have more of a sense of direction going forward and something that we're all a unified approach to addressing when issues come up. What is our process? That doesn't mean that there's not going to be an issue that might be an urgent issue that we can't take action on, the board can't take action on, but knowing that there's a process that if it isn't an emergent issue, perhaps we should be encouraging it to go through this process. So I think this is a good exercise.
When you put these all down in paper and can look at those and see where you're at, it's much better than what was being done years ago, where you get one project at a time coming at you, and you'd be funding something. The next thing you know, you have a really big project coming at you that you had no idea, what's going to be presented to you for funding. This way, you've got at least a better view of all of these and can help you make some decisions.
Jim and Deb.
When the planning commission, the law enforcement, talking about the cameras and, did they do a presentation to the planning?
No, but they submit these applications right here, and these are pretty lengthy. They have to give us a project name, start date, the justification. Is it listed in a document, like a master plan? Is it required by law? You know, they have to give us reasons for all that, and then they have to go through the funding, and is it an estimate, or did you bid this out? Are you using comparisons of, you know, what Grand Traverse County paid for something? All of that has to be put in here and then show us the timeline and so forth. So if there's a weakness, I think, in this process, it's with these applications.
Well,
We just don't get enough data from the departments ever on these projects to really get a good look at them.
I've spoken to some of the officers, and the new cameras that they want are self-documenting. You come in from your work, you download it, it recharges it. That information from that day is, you can't get rid of it. I mean,
Mhm.
and the good camera system that talk to the officers, they're really for it, because, you know, when you get sued for $100,000 and your wife asks you, are we gonna lose our house, okay? It's good to have the camera evidence and protect, you know, lawsuits and we spent a lot of, really, lately, we haven't spent a lot of money on lawsuits, but I think a real good investment, but it would be nice if the sheriff's department would have given a better presentation than just the application.
That was a great lead in to the point that I was gonna make, is that this also ties into each one of you and the committees that you serve on. So as you're thinking about the committees that you're sitting on and saying, you know, oh, I see this Leland Dam maintenance. Well, I would think maintenance to the Leland Dam would be a high priority. But, you know, not knowing exactly what that specific project is, but that's something that as we look at this document going forward, look at it through that lens as well, in terms of all the different committees that you sit on. And is there, you know, an understanding that you can advocate for these expenses as well?
It'd be great if the planning commission got the whole picture from the concerned people when they make that decision. You know?
It is an interesting process. It's two different parties that are
Right.
reviewing the information and gathering the information and then assessing it and then presenting it. But ultimately, the board has the authority to make that determination.
Better presentation.
More on the status right now, or are you done with that?
That's it.
Thank you, Trudy.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So as we're looking at that, you know, through that lens going forward, yes, you have these number one priorities that were presented previously with the vote, but there are several projects that are listed as twos that I think, based on the conversations that we've had recently, I think the board may agree that those are perhaps ones. One of them being the Leland Tower, as was mentioned. So there might,
Leelanau.
I'm sorry, Leland.
Don't you
I
be
do
putting
that.
another
I
tower
do
in.
that. I'm sorry.
Don't take this tower.
So anyhow, there's other projects that we need to be making priority.
And I'd like to just remind us all that we have a shadow in our background, and it's a big one. And that is if we do not get the Robin grant for District 6 and part of Solon. When we agreed to the Point project, we also agreed that we would pay, that the county would make sure that we got broadband in District 6 if we did not receive state money for it. That's a big shadow. But we have people out in 3.5 townships who still really have nothing. 25% of the kids at Glen Lake High School cannot do their homework at home because they do not have adequate broadband. I have all kinds of business people who are trying to work from home, trying to conduct classes. They have to go to the library. So that let's have a moment of prayer that we get the Robin grant. But let's not forget that.
I remember that differently. We committed it last year's board, never stopped seeking the money for that project. We never took board action to commit to using county funds for it. And I think there's a big difference between the two. I mean, we're talking millions and millions of dollars. We did never, and I'd ask that we check the records on that, but we were never going to stop seeking money with grants and working with our legislators and. with
Or
our
perhaps
partners.
getting a bond to do it. I do not recall getting a hope and a promise. I recall getting a commitment to do what it would take.
And a prayer.
Adding on to Commissioner Algar's, it seems to me, if I remember correctly, beyond that, we even under our current situation that we aren't actually contractually committed to, isn't there a substantial $1.8 million funding gap there already?
Yes.
Aside from
Yes.
what Commissioner Algar was talking about. So when I look at this, just when we look at this little rescue plan funds, it does mention the 1.8 or the 3.2, but it doesn't mention the 1.8 that it's not even open for, we signed documents that's money we owe no matter what. So that's another funding hole that just to
And we're trying to raise money for it, but I
Yeah,
haven't
but
heard
yeah,
of the
yeah.
status of that.
So again, I think that's a good segue. We know that there are capital improvement plan projects that take priority, as part of then the follow-up in terms of the executive summary that I provided based on that assessment that was done, based on my first 3 to 4 months in the position. So recognizing that there is brain trust issues in terms of staffing and transition of our staff, that we need to be thinking about what is that going to look like. There have been discussions about wage studies and that sort of thing. That's not necessarily something I think that is our top priority, but it is something we should be mindful of from the standpoint that recruitment of quality staff is going to continue to be an issue. We continue to have challenges in our dispatch, which is a national issue. It's certainly a local issue. It's a 911 health emergency and safety issue that we're going to have to address. How do we work with our union? How do we work with our staff to be able to make sure that we're down, we're up and then we're down 3 people. And now, so our leadership team is having to fill in those seats because we don't have enough dispatchers right now. So that's an issue that we are going to have to look at, as well as the facilities and things we've talked about. A facilities management person. Part of all this is that we don't have someone that is just managing all of the facilities, the towers, all of these components. And, perhaps, again, we've talked about this before, perhaps that needs to be a priority, that's that brain trust as well. And I think that's something that we decided.
I would just support that position because I think that's a position that pays for itself. Keeping track of how it's spent and how projects are completed and making sure they're completed. So just throwing it in there, I have a lot of support for that facilities manager position.
I don't know that we need to take action right now, but I'm simply saying, maybe that's something I can start looking at and seeing, are there companies that provide that service? Are there, is it worth having an individual talk to some of the other counties? What is Grand Traverse County doing and that kind of stuff? So I can start doing some information gathering, if that would be agreeable to the board. So we can have those discussions at the budget time. And then, programmatic was the other component. So it was people, it was facilities, it was programmatic. So things like the juvenile detention and some of those other things, like what are programmatically we being committed to, to look at, and how do we assess those things? And I think that programmatic discussion is part of the capital improvement plan, but it's also an additional discussion because those things don't end up on the capital improvement plan. So it's just discussing those processes. So I don't think there was actually a specific initiative there, but going real quickly, based on our kind of our discussion points here in our agenda, the next thing is to talk about, the funding. And, so you do have just an overview sheet that's in front of you that talks about the ARPA plan, the American Rescue Plan Act. and how the funds were allocated, what our total allocation for the county was, and then what the current commitments are and what the remaining fund is. So, based on the expenditures that are listed here, you can see that we have allocation commitments totaling 3,384,000, leaving a balance of 842,819. And of that 1.8 million that we spoke about could be, so in essence, $1 million, as I understand it. There's $1 million then that we would, above and beyond what's obligated on this sheet, that the county would be responsible for. Is that also your understanding, Kathy?
Now this isn't possible, like maybe this is, we signed ink, right? I mean, that's, so,
Not there.
when I look at that sheet, it doesn't really show it. In actuality, assuming that's where the money comes, we don't really have 800,000 remaining funds, we have 1 million in remaining obligation.
Good point.
So we did solicit requests from the townships and villages for projects, and when people have asked me, I say, boy, we'd really love to do that, and we still have to fund it right. So I'm kind of letting them know that providing broadband.
I made that.
Yes, Jamie.
Grants. Because I've been, looking myself, but so I know that there's a lot of grants out there. How are we tackling that?
Yes.
So certainly when I would imagine when some of these proposals, is there an option on there, Trudy, for them to mark if there's grant funding available?
Yes, under the funding, if there's.
Okay.
Yeah, it's on some of the
So for example, the patrol boat is a great example. I mean, there is FEMA funds for marine vision, port security, a lot of different components there. So there are grant funds available, but the requirement is no one can apply for a grant without board approval. So it has to come to the board first, so to apply for the grant, and so that's step one. Then if they're successful, then the next thing is that the board has to approve accepting the grant. Because what oftentimes will happen is that if you apply for a grant, there's usually some component of that, there's more requirements to it, there's more cost to it.
Sure.
So even if the grant pays for the equipment, well, maybe there's a staff person that needs to be affiliated with that. So, sometimes there's those cross threads. So to your point, yes, there are often grants that are looked for, but it's not necessarily a guarantee that, say, well, can you pay for that for a grant?
And the sheriff always applies for that grant. We always, okay it. He always applies for a grant every year. He just hasn't gotten it yet. And we always approve his application.
How many are like, do you have one gatekeeper for applying for grants, or is it just like,
Well,
I mean, other than us, right? Like it's us, we say, yes, you can apply. But
all grants are supposed to be vetted through the finance director.
Okay.
So that's been in the, in the documentation. So we will more diligent, I think, about looking at that going forward, that, vetting those grants beforehand, communication, the communication circle, it should be, if somebody's applying for a grant, what is this for? Have you submitted your request for the CIP? So that there's a lot of, again, cross-threading, cross-checking, so that we're making sure that we've got all of the processes and all of the communication. And have you applied to the board to approve for this grant? So I'm excited about the process. I think we just need to use the process, work the plan, plan the work. I think we'll all be in a much happier place if we can get this process established.
Do we have a sort of grant writer, a person that writes grants? I know that in Elmwood we did, we had a fireman that got us a $400,000 engine, it cost nothing. Actually, I believe to volunteer for some grants. Do we have a particular person here that does that?
We don't have a particular person, but I can tell you that Trudy has often been pulled into the grant writing process, and certainly in the sheriff's department, they have individuals that do that. It is certainly that I have expertise in as well. In fact, I'm working with the sheriff's office to get the grant put together. They've done all the hard heavy lifting. I'm just helping to, get the information put in there. So I don't think we've gotten to a point yet where we need to look at an outside source, but I don't know, Trudy, you might have some other insight on that as well.
Well, it seems Trudy
Nice
gets
to
stuck
know
with
we have
everything,
somebody.
you know? And she's superwoman. She does everything, you
I
know?
do wonder about all of your bandwidth,
Yeah.
like being able to fulfill all of those things. I mean, I've always, and I could be wrong, but I've always thought that a grant writer.
One federal grant can take 40 hours.
Mhm.
It's pretty significant, timeframe. So it really depends on the grant and the familiarity that we have. Is it the second time we've applied for the same grant? A lot of the legwork has been done. If it's the same, like the good example is the vote. They've applied multiple times, so it's a pretty streamlined process.
But it goes to the finance and then it comes to the board to approve submitting the grant.
It should.
They should.
Kim?
I would just like to support your Commissioner Work's feeling about that. The other commissions or committees that I sit on, the Parks and Rec, South Kimberly, and the Big Dam Authority, we're all discussing grants, and nobody has a grant writer. So, yeah, I just think it is a conversation that maybe should be included as we go forward. How can we best support our county? And we want to do, it's got to be through more grants, and professional help is out there. With our investigating further.
I mean, does anyone know if like this grant members have a grant writer?
They're through Rotary Charities, there's a myriad of people that have been signed up, that are resources.
Yeah.
So there are definitely quite a few grant writers in the area that we can be looking at, who do it as a fee-based service. And there, a lot of times the grants actually include an administrative fee, like 12% you can allocate for, the writing of the grant or the administration of the grant.
There's ChatGPT.
I'm looking now at, it's 10 minutes to 3 and we must be done at 4:30.
So I think we're at a point now where we've talked about the goal setting, or I'd say priority setting for the CIP. We've talked about what our current issues and challenges are. And I think now we've talked about the ARPA funding. And I think now we probably can have some discussion about what are our financial resources at the county level. And I know John's been anxiously waiting in the wings. So John, do you mind coming up? And I know Kathy's also, had some input on, or some thought process on this as well. So as we talk about the general fund, the DTR, jail, loan status, as well as bonds for some of these major projects, these are the options.
Sure.
Share. John, what is settlement?
Is the DTR's annual payment out
Two.
local units of government?
Cost.
Sorry.
Oh, wait, did you want to give one to Melinda though?
Oh,
Yeah,
yes.
okay. Thank you.
Sorry.
We're talking about numbers.
Okay, good. That's what I'm saying.
And you need to add some zeros in here somewhere. This ain't gonna work out.
No, it's not dire straits, but we're gonna be tight. I would say this is just a quick snapshot as of today. Looking at the DTR delinquent tax revolving fund, which is the tax fund that I operate for the settlement of taxes and adjustments. We're starting off with a balance of 4.3. We have a settlement that we're going to be dispersing within the next couple of weeks of 2.6. We just had a 19-year on capping come through that we have to distribute, and that's $345,000.
Distribute to,
The local units, I'll say, the taxes that should have been levied and did not get levied. So they have, the citizen who the taxes are being assessed against has time to appeal. So we may not get paid back for some time. So that's why I wanted to present this and show you that there's a lot of things that come into play when trying to figure out how much we have, and that might only be good for just a snapshot in time. So,
Thank you. John, was that a PRE?
no, that was not a PRE. No, that was just uncapping. Software for 18,000 for the drain district, and the drain district itself for 253. Brings our cash balance down to 1.1 million. I do have some money market funds available at 2.1. And that brings the DTR current available to 3.2. Now, this is cash. We're not talking fund balance. So this is just what is available for use today. So if you had a check that you needed to write, this is what I'm telling is available as of today for that.
money class is,
It is a organization that I use to invest pooled assets, investments. It's basically a money market account.
so there's only 2,000 in that.
Yes,
And how much do we like to keep on?
Fund.
Yeah, what do
well,
we like to keep on hand?
as you can see, I mean, my settlement is 2.6. Uncappings range from $5 to $350,000. So I'd like to stay around that $3 to $4 million range. You know, as far as fund balance is concerned, I think we're at a 6.8 right now, fund balance. So we do have wiggle room to draw down on the DTR. But again, the issue is for me is timing. As it was explained, the CIP hasn't been introduced as a functioning budget tool in my tenure. So for us to try to generate a cash flow requirement for the county on these projects and operations has just been difficult. So I've been able to keep most of our assets liquid so that if we do need them, they're on demand.
Okay, you confused, I'm sorry.
Yes,
You said something about, so we have 6. Is that because you haven't distributed the settlement money yet?
it is because I have receivables equal to the amount I'm distributing. I said those are on the books as money that I'm gonna have come in over the next year.
Okay, so the DTR is currently 3.2, but you're anticipating having up to 6.
It will grow throughout the year as I collect delinquent taxes.
But then there will be settlements going on.
Correct, correct. So that's why I try to keep, you know, a balance in there that I can operate. Because at March, when I have to settle with the townships, it's $3 to $4 million. We might not get it out until today, but nonetheless, those are the obligations that we have to meet on an annual basis.
I think she might be confused. When he's talking cash he has right now.
Yes,
He's not talking about excellent investments he's got coming, you know what I mean, that he has. This is what he has in the bank accounts for you to use at this time. Does that make more
Correct.
sense?
Yeah, but that 6 isn't here.
correct.
Because it's built in what
It's-
he's saying.
It's built into the receivables, it's built into all that stuff.
This is difference between a balance sheet and cash in the bank.
Yes,
Balance sheet will show receivables that you expect to get, and then
Correct.
expenses you expect to pay, that you already know of, as opposed to, right, I only got like 500 in the bank, but I can have a net worth of $2 million.
correct, correct. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
So moving to the general fund, we're pretty tight just because we haven't started our summer collection yet. So we have $574,000 in cash. I'm gonna move 236,000 for settlement. That is coming out of DTR into the general fund, so we're not really gaining or losing. It's just a transfer of funds. But we have the bond payment for LEC coming up in the next 30 days, and that's law enforcement.
How many years left on that?
I want to say
Through 2027, 27, right?
4 years.
and the Michigan class investments for the general fund bring that total current available to 1.4. Now, this is liquid, this is draft form, this is just to get conversations started. I haven't consulted finance, as far as their opinion on this, but this is what we're looking at from Treasury as what's available. The best thing I can say at this point is with the prioritization, put together a reasonable calendar of when this stuff is going to take place, because it's going to determine on whether or not we need financing and when we need financing. If these projects are to assume all in 2023, we're going to be in a deficit. We're not going to be able to do it. If we spread this out over the next 24 months or even 36 months, cash flow from operations, investments, tax revenues, other funding sources could come in where we wouldn't need financing. But as it stands today, we have overcommitted and haven't allocated enough to start these projects. Just our obligations, what we have to do as far as the HVAC and the broadband.
Just those
So-
two.
Those two alone.
So I've always assumed we would do something like that.
That's very plausible. Yes,
Because we don't have money. And
we have some money to pay for it. And like I said, if we do it over a period of time, I mean, the natural case in construction is you're gonna have startup. By the time you get the bid opening and equipment ordered and jobs scheduled, we might not be even looking at somebody with boots on the ground for 6 to 9 months. In that case, I don't have to spend any money. The county doesn't have to spend any money for that period. And that allows us to get more financing in place.
But we could finance that.
Yes.
I don't see us paying that because we have a lot of obligations that are very important. We've been putting off HVAC for years. I think we should bite the bullet. Bond it out if we have to, but just get it done. We're chunking it down. Not efficiently. We should just do it and do the job. But if we have to bond it, to leave some money for some of these other things that are important.
Just a question, because I mean, there's like 7 tentacle conversations that are going on here. What is your goal to get done today? Administrator Allen? If you say, what is the one thing you'd like to see us try to get done? I mean, obviously, we can't figure out financing, bonding. I mean, not that those aren't good options, but what are we trying to get to today? What do you want us to, what's our answer?
Well, I think to the point, if we look at our assets, I think the HVAC system is definitely high priority. But
Maybe I'm not phrasing the question. That's just the one thing, or is it like you're asking us to agree on like some amount of priority one items? What is the goal of today's meeting? I guess that's what I'm trying to
Well,
understand.
the goal is to show you all the moving parts so that we can move forward with, ideally, if we can get to by 4 o'clock today with the top 5 priority items based on the discussions that we've had. And kind of looking at this, everyone's been asked to give goals, everyone's been asked to give, kind of their priorities and give feedback. And we haven't received a whole lot of that to this point. I think I've actually received maybe 2 back from, commissioners that have said, these are the kind of the things that we'd like to see move forward. So I think the end goal is to maybe have 5 items that we can move forward with and then start talking about how we're going to prioritize them or how we're going to fund them going forward.
The funding might be in a whole nother meeting at a different day. We're just trying to get to, assuming we could find money. I'm just trying to understand the mindset of the meeting, so.
Narrow the list down.
Narrow the list
Okay,
down.
and then figure out how to pay for it, and that may change the list even after that. I mean, if we can't come up with a way to pay for all those things, then we do 3 of them, or whatever the.
And making sure those things are part of the capital improvement plan going forward. I do have one quick, sorry, just to ask about the ARPA funds are not represented in this
No.
document.
No, they're not.
Okay, so we have those dollars, we have expended, I think at this point, and Jen and Kathy, I'm gonna ask for your help on that. We have expended the dollar for the home stretch, so 125,000. I think we expended the 61. I'm not sure what the total balance left in that fund account is, but I know we're generating interest on that as well.
Not much.
Not much now.
Not much.
Commissioner Lautner had her hand up before. I don't know if you still have the question.
Well, some of it is just exactly what you're speaking to, and that was, while there is some ARPA funds left, there's not enough to cover what we
Already obligated.
committed. Right, that's what we're looking for, committed. So there is the HVAC, and then also what came as a surprise to us was, and you've got it on here, was the drain district, but there's potentially, 4 more drain districts, and we don't know what those are going to cost us. We think the one we just did might be the most expensive, but we've got South Bar, which I can't believe is going to be cheap. And I can't believe Schaumburg's going to be cheap either. So those are future, and then the wall, and I did see the black wall repair. I don't think that's something that we should wait too long on, before a chunk of that falls off on someone's head.
We're waiting for the assessment to come back from that. So mission is already, it's just them getting out here to do that assessment.
And this is just, we've got an approximate cost, but we don't know. If we're lucky it comes in less, it may come in more.
Commissioner Renfro?
I'll be real quick, sorry, but I also see through these things when I look at funds as funding sources. The general fund is mentioned in here and ARPA funds, but there's a thing called capital improvement fund as a potential funding source. Do you know what that is and does it exist?
Yeah, so I was gonna comment on that, but I waited until called upon. So
There's several other
when
that come.
when Trudy gets the application states the funding source, correct? You don't create this?
No, the
So the-
department heads to create.
The department head, no one from finance has verified that these are your funding sources. And I can already tell you, I haven't found maybe one that is accurate.
Okay, that was my, because I was asked about the several other ones that look like it's a spot. So there is no capital improvement fund.
I mean, the
There's got
best
$2
one
million
is to be determined.
Yeah, that's the one, that's the one that's most likely to exist.
That's the one
All
that
right.
should exist on
So,
all
like-
things other than motor pools.
So,
The motor
like-
pool's a good one.
Yeah.
The computer fund, the Parks and Rec, all these are mentioned all the way through here, several spots. Capital projects is one that's mentioned a lot.
This goes
There isn't
back,
a dollar sitting somewhere in those buckets anywhere. It's just okay.
Great question.
So if we were going to prioritize projects in terms of having goals, my first vote would be, let's just bite the bullet and do HVAC. We've been talking about 2 years. Let's bond it out of whatever we have to do. Make sure that people are warm or cool as needed. That we continue in our exploration of the downstairs project. when we have an opportunity to finish our lower level. And not pay for the whole thing. That I would like, and this doesn't take any money from us as an extraneous goal, I sure you know, I keep my nose out there, finding some funding source, some way to fund attainable housing. So that's not something that would take money from us, other than, that's not saying there might be projects that we contribute to. But some funding source. I agree, we probably need a facilities manager. I think that's a good agreement going into our budget process, but that's where we usually deal with those things. And I'd like to get an energy audit done. We haven't had one. I checked in years and years and years. I'm not sure if that actually costs us any money. So that would be my vote.
Just trying to like get a path forward from where we're at. There's one thing I feel like we don't have is like a complete picture of all the obligations we have. They're on a bunch of different pieces of paper and a bunch of different spots. You know, but I mean, the capital improvement doesn't include the possible health department. You know, it was mentioned about the drainage districts. Those are committed funds we have to pay. I don't feel like I mean, I'm trying to do math. I have notes written on like 6 different spots, but I don't have a comprehensive list of fun things. And I'm just offering a suggestion. Is it possible to get that information? And then in order for us to move forward, we could talk for like years, and I don't disagree with even what Commissioner Elgar said on things, but maybe it's best for us to respond back and say, all right, if you can give us that information, we'll send you back a list each individually, and we'll give you a score of 1 to 10 on all of these and have it be compiled and then come back. And I'm just trying to figure out a way to, I feel like we'll talk about this for about 3 hours, everyone who thinks they have something important, not that disrespecting anyone's opinion. I just don't know that we'll get.
We can't get there without the figures.
Right, we need the numbers, and then maybe we just say, okay, you know, maybe we have to do this again for an hour, but I'm open to comments, but if we go home and do some homework and do some thought with the information and say, okay, this, I see this one as a number 10, I start number 1, rank them, whatever. I'm just, maybe that won't work, but I have a hard feeling like each of us just voicing our.
I bet we have a couple people over there that have a pretty good handle on,
Yeah, I was just saying, he has another wonderful idea.
Yeah.
And that Kathy and I would love to put that together, and then we can discuss with John. We're talking cash. Because a couple things that she and I had that we've been talking with the auditors and we haven't gotten together with is on that drainage district. That loan is going to be paying you back. So the drainage and the software, we were already thinking is going to be general fund, because once you go out for that note, it's going to come back in. And so, yeah, it's just shuffling pennies, but if we use general fund for that, then you track what you expended for that drainage, what the road commission owes you, what's coming back in. So we both found out after speaking with another CPA at a different county that the drainage is going to be something much larger than I've ever done accounting wise. And it's definitely something that our auditors are going to help us with, but this isn't going to be one fund for drainage. This looks like it's going to be 6 funds. You have a debt service, like you pay the law enforcement bonds. So because you took a note, you have to have on your books that you have that loan out there. Then you have the asset of the actual district, and then each district, and then where the tax money comes in to pay. So this is much larger than what Kathy and I were thinking. So as you can see, I think I'm breaking out in hives about it. Yeah. So we want to look at that, but I definitely think, I mean, John's right on here, you know, looking at your cash as of today, this is what this looks like. And we can certainly put together what we know, because as Gwen didn't have in her list, which is, she has a great list as right now, your Leelanau Tower, I think is your top priority.
I forgot to
within
put
this
broadband on it.
But these next 2 months, I think your Leelanau broadband is where John and the general fund, or DTR and general fund, are gonna have to look to cost share if you're gonna erect a tower. Because we right now, I already know going into budget, you don't have any tower money. You spent tower money because you erected a tower here, you know, and we didn't dip into DTR, you built that within your tower fund. So the past isn't coming back to haunt you, but when you pull, then you have to figure out where it's gonna come back in from. So I think Kathy and I can tell you what we both know, the number one priority right now for the next 2 months is you need to find tower money. You have none. So it'll either be pulled from DTR and general fund together, the cost allocation that you're gonna do, if you're gonna do it with Leelanau and Cherryland, how does that look? How is it represented? Who owns the land? Who's putting in improvements? There's a huge amount with just this, I wanna say, little comment of a Leelanau tower that could be upwards of $600,000. You know, we don't know until you have those pieces lined out from a construction standpoint. But I think that's your top priority right now, and that'll be on the list that she puts together for you. Right, first I see is Leelanau Township.
Yeah, you'll see those documents in your board packet actually as drafts. So you can kind of start seeing.
Yeah, I guess I just, I'm happy with that, but like, all of that stuff on a spreadsheet somewhere that
Yep.
says total money obligated,
Yep.
things we gotta do. I mean, I know they're all over individual pieces of paper, but asking us to make those, they're top of mind to folks who deal with them every day. For us, we're trying to make decisions that I need to see. Because there's all sorts of things that, like you said, that are going on
Uh-huh.
that we've already
That's
signed ink. We have no choice, and Commissioner Lovner makes that same comment, so.
Again,
Gwen and then Melinda.
You know, I think one thing that I'm experiencing. In the past, we've done board goals in the beginning of the year and they were aspirational. We didn't sit down and say, yes, this is how much it's gonna cost and this is what we're gonna do. They were things that we would then bring up during the year and we would go through this process maybe in September. Okay, this is a goal we talked about. Let's see if we can, now we'll try to do it. And now we're trying to make sure every single thing we say is our board goal is something we're absolutely concretely can do. We know we've got the money. So I'm not saying that's wrong. I'm just saying, I know for me, part of my expectation in the last meeting too was, we always had just a list of goals. And then we did this hard work during the year as we figured out, okay, can we do this? Can we do this? So this is good,
Right.
but I don't think we have to be. It's good to nail down, 2 or 3 things we absolutely have to do. But we have to decide, okay, we're not doing any aspirational stuff here.
But I have heard at this table the last several months, most everybody at this table has expressed concern about where's the money coming from. And where are we spending it?
Right.
And we've heard it from Jen, we've heard it from Kathy, we've heard it from John, certainly heard from you.
Yeah.
And so that's what we're working on now. I like the summary thing.
Yeah.
Melinda?
Yeah, thank you. That's where I was going with it. Just seems like over the last couple of years, there's been some shoot from the hip almost things, and it's not that they've been all bad, but we do have the obligation to broadband. We've brought that up. The other thing is what Gwen just touched on is her district, and do we still need to find funds to cover that southwestern corner of the county so we can get shore to shore broadband in Leelanau County. So there is what's obligated, and what I would like to see too, when it comes to the drain districts, I think we got a list of how much we've expended so far in these districts, and it was like $250,000, and that was.
That'll all come back.
May. Yeah, it's going to all come back, but it's different districts, so it's gonna be a while, so I'd kind of like to see that as a subset of this list we're going to put together so that we can follow that. The tower we touched on, and then I'd like to see all those things that we're obligated to do, that we're mandated to do, and then look at our wish list.
Agreed.
My wish list, and the first thing I'm gonna push for is our parks. Our parks, we could easily absorb and spend $500,000 on some of the projects that we would like to do for our parks to make them what we would like to see them be, and we're trying to do that shoestring. Sorry.
cash flow as well. I mean, not just the total numbers, but.
Yeah, yes,
so
exactly.
when your
be
money
available
starts coming
six-
in.
yeah,
Mhm.
yeah, yeah.
Jamie?
Just to add to Melinda's point, because I've been looking at Michigan grants for things like that, and there are so many grants for parks and parkland that's available. There's so much money
Keeps getting
available.
turned down.
That's a bummer.
Yeah.
We're too green up here?
We're not
No,
kind,
it's-
we,
no,
this
it's
county,
like-
and I'm very proud to say, we try to run on a shoestring here. You know,
Yeah.
we really try to, could we overtax our citizens? Yeah, we could, to pay for these things. Because what these grants say is, we're pretty lucrative up here. They say we're rich. You know, our per capita is.
Second highest per capita state.
Oh, I know, I looked at the.
So they
map.
say,
It's kind of
Leelanau, you
amazing,
don't,
yeah.
you don't need grant money, you've got it in your tax base. We just choose not to overtax our citizens for it, so. Anyway, that's
Yeah.
what we've done.
So
We have the lowest tax.
With the highest SEVs, which means our tax rate brings in more money than any other area because of our SEVs.
SCV's not taxable.
Yeah.
It's your taxable. So just to kind of wrap things up as we kind
It's
of,
taxable, based on our SEVs, yes.
as we finalize kind of our discussions on this, I think that this was incredibly timely. Because we're all going to be going into the budgeting process. So a lot of the information that we've discussed here, while it seems painful, it's a time well spent and process well spent. You know, the county is in strong financial standings, and our tax revenue will increase as, you know, we start getting tax dollars in. So we'll probably see some increase in that. So we will have some flexibility, I think, going forward. Over the next several years, I think that will kind of build. So I think that, you know, please understand, this is not a dire strait. This is let's get a handle on, you know, the things that we've got going and be able to move forward with some of these commitments. And I think, like I said, this has been time well spent. I don't know that today, based on the information that we still need to get, that we're gonna be at a place where we can set top priorities, but I think we've talked about several of the things, and I can kind of put those down, and we'll get the financial information together as well as the information that John's put together. We do have a grant that's out right now, $5 million request for broadband, so we have to wait and see what the allocations will be. We've received initial indications that that's a very solid commitment, but we also know that there's 25 million in the DHHS grant for the juvenile detention. We don't know exactly what that's gonna mean, if that goes forward. So there are still some unknowns that are out there in terms of obligations for the county going forward. So we will do the best we can to put this information together, so at least we're all moving forward with eyes wide open in terms of what obligations and what commitments and what processes.
And I think we ought to continue to be thankful that Senator Dumas and Representative COTW are sponsoring budget line item for our completion of our project, and so we're not going to give up on that, but that's in the works. I'd like to say, as Commissioner for Leelanau Township, that I think our number one priority job for this county is safety. And one of the reasons I've been talking forever about the Leelanau Tower is we do have a responsibility for safety. And that's even more important to me than whether Jen's warm or not in her office. So as you think about priorities, I hope we don't lose sight of the fact we've got the Leelanau Tower, two partners right now. The township's committed, and we're going to be reviewing another partner. But we got to find a way to make sure we meet our initial obligations for resident safety, I think. Yeah. Melinda?
Well, thank you for that, and Jen kind of touched on what I was going to ask about that too, because I didn't know where we were in the process with that Leelanau Tower. I agree, it's something that we need to do. But I was trying to remember what our budget motion was and how much to spend on that, so it kind of sounds like we're moving forward, but maybe we need to get some processes in place, and so we'll be doing that Tuesday.
That's on the
Right.
agenda for Tuesday.
And I think we could, as part of the compilation of information that Kathy and Jen will put together, we could probably look back at what the board had. I believe it was 300,000. I'm not 100% sure for that tower, because it actually is in the CIP. So I'll have to go back and look at that. What was initially, at least in the CIP, what was allocated or what was identified as in terms of an expense for that.
Identified, but not
Identified.
allocated. Yeah.
The current commitment we'll talk about on Tuesday, but I may have been 400,000 now that I think about it, but we have about 300,000 in commitments if we move forward with the project, so, which I anticipate we will. More to come on that on Tuesday.
And you know, if we end up not getting the money. maybe we need to talk about it.
Thanks, John.
Thank you,
Thank
John.
you, Thanks, John.
If we don't, if we don't get any money to finish, that aren't part of the county, maybe one of our options is to talk to Tower down there.
Plus, I gotta make.
But we've got to get those people covered.
So on this list of like CIP things, there's several things that are not on here that are still money. Things we need to consider and importance. Can we get an additional list? I don't know, maybe that's part of what we're already asking for, but.
I see it all.
Well, I have the same thing, I mean, like, the anything that's not on here that you feel is a priority that has a money thing attached to it. I mean, it's pretty hard, because we forget, I mean, all right, that's a good idea, we
Yeah.
spent 200,000, and all right, these are our priorities, well, I forgot, I just spent 200,000 on that, I mean, it sounds facetious, but it's.
I
we
think
don't-
there are two key things that we need to get on the CIP.
Yeah.
That's the downstairs project,
Right,
and the tower's already on there, so I
Okay.
expect actually, I think.
then I guess the other stuff, if it's on the committed money, like the 1 million or 1.8 million, we committed on the
Broadband.
broadband, and anything that we're like knee deep into already. Committed to, should be somewhere on a piece of paper, all in one spot. So that-
Based on board action.
Yeah, based on previous board action.
We are scheduled for the board meeting in May to have another finance session. Would that be a time that we could see what our obligations are,
Regular.
rather than trying to schedule another committee meeting? We,
Do you want it at, I mean, if you want it at the work session, we certainly can. We can provide it to you under cover of an email, and then you can be prepared to make adjustments and check our work. Is
That
that,
would be the focus of that work session.
and that would be the focus of that work session? That's up to you.
That sounds-
Sure.
is that fit with everybody?
Yeah.
Yes. That's a great lead in, because the next month we'll be moving into the budgeting process, so I think that's great to have all that information right in front of you before we.
Is that enough time for you to get it together?
Absolutely, it's right off the top of my head.
Is there any support for like the individual ranking idea on this stuff? I mean, I don't. Give it a 1 to 9 score as a legal commissioners, have that compiled for our discussion later on, or is it, you think, once we can raise, we're just sitting there?
Yeah, we could send out the list that we have, and then if you see something that isn't on there that you want to see, maybe because we would reply to all, Kathy would reply to all, and then you guys could rank them, and then,
Trying to get to the top, I don't know, I'm just trying to think of an effective way that it wouldn't be like that's not the end all, but it'd give
Yeah.
feedback from the whole group, I mean.
We did, last time we met, suggest everybody send their top priorities to Deb. But now maybe we know more about what those options are. I know you can see mine.
Absolutely. Maybe we wait until we get the information that's shared with everyone at the regular meeting.
Yep.
On, what would that be, the week from Tuesday? Yeah, a week from Tuesday, so I think that's around the.
15th.
Thank you. Yes, so at the regular meeting, we'll review this, and then maybe the next step from that is that everyone do their ranking based on that information.
Sure.
And then.
That's
you know, then
timely
we'll-
enough.
We'll have that going into June, so that everyone has a clear understanding. I'll compile it once we get the information from everyone.
That's timely enough for your needs, then. to
Absolutely.
That schedule.
Absolutely.
So it depends on need or depends on cost?
Yes.
Thank you.
Here's the hat. You know, one other thing that we haven't touched on, and maybe this is gonna fall under a facilities manager, but as I go around the courthouse, I've been noticing a lot of what we would call the nickel and dime things that are going to start costing us some money in here. We're already talking about some carpet replacement for the heavier used offices here. I've noticed in the ladies' room, Formica peeling away. It doesn't look really very professional. I may have noticed it in the women's locker room in the basement. I have not been in the men's locker room in the basement or the men's restroom, so I have no idea. We're going to have to start cleaning up some of those things at some point too.
Facility
we're-
manager.
Ongoing maintenance issues.
Yeah, they're
Right.
just kind of getting,
Our building's
Push
getting,
up.
our building's getting older, and those things increase.
yep.
Well, this has been helpful, I think, and now we'll get the information to John and put that with the information John put together. And reconvene on this discussion 2 weeks from yesterday. 2 weeks from last Tuesday.
On the 16th.
Thank you.
Any other comments on this before we go to public comments?
Yes, everyone say a little, whatever way you pray every night, that the Robin grant comes through.
Our fingers
Yes,
crossed.
fingers crossed. And that the moves and Copia are successful. Emma?
Yeah, I'd just like to say too that as we go forward, I still think our board, taking a look at a mission statement or some sort of formal process. And maybe that's next year, maybe that's the end of this year after, but I still think I would really value some time spent just talking about some of the ways that we do agree and how we can go forward with the same overarching theme of safety, public, whatever it is. Let's not lose that, I guess. It's my ask.
Thank you. Kim.
Thank you.
Anybody else?
You can-
We now are at public comment, and I would invite public comments / staff comments. You've heard us talking. If you have a comment you'd like to make.
Zach, you're up.
On that, it's just.
Judy?
Two things for you. The land bank has gotten allocations for blight elimination, and we were able to send in one application and get funds to help Elmwood Township. We have another one coming through this month. We just got notified this morning, John and I, that the next round, which is $500,000, because of where Leelanau County falls with the area median income, along with Grand Traverse, Benzie, and many others, we are not allowed to use that next round of $500,000 for blight elimination or for construction. We will be able to use it on housing rehabilitation. So John and I contacted the state and we set up a call for Monday because we need to understand what this means. We had other projects, other developers that were looking at some help for blight elimination, and we won't be able to use those funds. So we'll figure that out and then follow up with you. And the other thing, just discussion on a grant administrator or a grant writer, I mean, that's come up a little bit over the years. And while I think there's some merit to it, a person really needs to have a great understanding of the county in order to submit grants. And, you know, someone who's writing for Parks and Rec is going to write something different than I would for environmental protection, for brownfield grants and so forth. But the other aspect of that I think would be beneficial is having someone who provides the oversight of all of these grants. Because once you get them, the department head is responsible for all the quarterly reports, drawing down the funds, making sure everything is submitted to accounting for their auditing purposes. And you're relying really on one person or one department for each one of those grants to make sure it's done properly. And there isn't that big umbrella watching over saying, okay, how many grants do we still have out there that have to be closed out this year? Are the reporting requirements done, and so on and so forth. So that might be something to take into consideration too. Thank you.
Thank you, Judy.
So you're looking for like a gatekeeper basically, someone who's.
I'm just throwing it out there. I'm not saying that that's what we need.
Yeah.
You know, as I've implemented grants over the years and seen other departments do it, that's a part that I see that's missing. So, you know, it always falls on whoever is in charge of administering that grant to make sure that you did it all right. And if you didn't, it's gonna show up later. So you don't have that one person or one department that's also assisting and making sure that everyone is completing these grants that you as a county said, we're accepting these because ultimately you're responsible for them.
I mean, a perfect example of that is the C3 grant with our substance abuse committee. you know, we allow them to use to be the go-through for that, but we have limited ability to mandate what, you know, how they do the reporting on that. We have an issue right now where we have to do a report, so we need to get the information on that. So I mean, that's just one example that maybe going forward, that's a consideration that we have when we're offering to do these things or accepting these opportunities for other entities. So just something to consider. Could be it's a library.
John, anything from you? No, sir. Any commissioner comments? Sir?
I just agreeing with Trudy, I mean, that's a management technical champion, so like, the person who's good at Parks and Recs, who's good at those things, they know how to write that grant, but tying them up with book entry things is not utilizing their talents to the fullest, so having that person that's, okay, I just gotta track the expenditures, but it's a great suggestion, so I think it should be considered, so.
I'd just like to thank Jen and Kathy because we're sitting here talking and she's supposed to be recording and this and they bring in points that we would have missed.
Exactly.
Touch our time and keep saying, I'm not part of the discussion, but I really appreciate her jumping in. She knows the facts and brings the stuff. It helps save us a lot of time.
Commissioner Luckner?
We've got, wanted to ask Trudy where we are on our recycling events coming up. Are there still openings for mattresses, for batteries, for hazardous waste, for tires?
The May collection is totally full. What we're telling people, because they're calling in, is to just keep checking the status, because sometimes people will cancel out and open it up. We still have openings for mattresses and tire recyclings.
Thank you.
Anybody else? It's been a good day. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Could I have we don't need a motion to adjourn. Could I have a shake of head? Let's adjourn.
Yes.
Adjourn.
Right, I know.
We might as well do it. You can always try any other.
It is tomorrow.
I know, but
Okay.
Where the
I just
Pretty good judges.
I mean, you should run.
I don't think.
I thought they weren't doing their damn job all this time, so.
You did not say that like.
It was real
I
close,
just, I
wasn't it?
emailed, you did it, I could tell.
I know, you guys can say that.
I was holding back.
So let me just double
They're
check.
trying, I think they're over tax. I said, I'm just getting more into our business. We have things.
Usually for the individuals and stuff, I usually get a press
You got
release.
that right.
That's, I mean, seriously, it's reasonable.
Yeah, like.
I know, but I would suggest 3 years is not. That's just not. So maybe we have to
Make sure
tell
that
them.
everybody like. They can just.
Or a rebrand.
Anyways.
Thank you, Jen.
I have this thing called Canva. I just sit there, they know how to do it. I'm not gonna fine,
I know.
but like,
Because, you know, I sent an
I'd
email
rather
a few days
spend
ago.
2
and
pages
then go to the mail and-
and
And so right this week, dialogue.
Yep,
absolutely. I'll go back right now and see if we're okay.
That's
I'll be
really
sending
nice.
it.
Okay. So you gotta get
I know,
some.
I'm
Yes, sir, see ya.
we'll just wait. I just.
You could have worked with me, that Zach would have said I would have been done.
Here, we're gonna call it right now.
It's not gonna be a problem.
Thank you. I know, all right.
And then
Oh,
you're,
right.
I guess, I was reminded that, we'll have a spot.
I thought so.
I don't want to adjourn.
He just wants to.